Celtic Badass of the Week showcases a different badass person of Celtic heritage each week. Those who exemplify the give no shit attitude and come out on top. They may come from our past or our present, but rest assured they come from all walks of life and legend. They are men, women, even old ladies and pirate queens. You don't have to be a muscled up Celt in a fur kilt swinging a mighty sword. You can just be a 4'11" Welsh woman and suffragette who knows jujitsu. Most of these badasses are all too real. While some may be only legend, badass legends though. The only prerequisite for this title is Celtic blood and badassedness.
Tom Crean. Tom Crean was a gigantic Irish farm boy that was built like a concrete machine gun bunker, and whose primary talents generally involved his ability to drink, fight, and carry insanely heavy objects over ridiculously long distances without complaining too much about it. Now, he enlisted in the Royal Navy at the age of 15 as, well, a boy, second class. That's the actual title. Served 27 years in some of the most brutal environments on the planet, performed heroic and unbelievable feats of human strength and endurance, survived weeks and months in some of the most ferocious, unforgiving environments on Earth, received a chest full of medals for heroism, exploration, scientific discovery, and participated in nearly every major expedition from the heroic age of Antarctic exploration. Then he came home and never talked about any of it. He's basically everyone's badass grandpa who went out into the world with nothing but whatever crap he had in his pockets, did some manly stuff in his life, and then came home. Met a nice girl and never talked about any of the insane things he'd done in his life. And he also liked puppies. Now, Tom Crean was born July 20th, 1877, on a tiny hilltop village in County Kerry, Ireland. He was one of 10 kids who lived in a little farm out there in the middle of nowhere. Went to school just long enough not to be illiterate, and then decided, forget this, I'm getting the hell out of this place as fast as I can. He joined the British Royal Navy in 1893, even though he was only 15 years old. He lied about his age, of course. Back then, you could still mostly get away with that, and set his sail on the high seas in search of adventure and excitement. His initial rank was Boy Second Class, which was probably one of my favorite naval rankings ever. Quickly made a name for himself for being as tough as nails. No bullshit, Paddy would drink you under the table and then beat your ass in a fist fight. He also possessed freakishly super strength that allowed him to drag stuff around so heavy that most of the other guys on his boats couldn't even believe it. And it turns out there were a lot of uses for that in the Royal Navy in the late 1890s. Now, after 8 years of getting promoted through the ranks of badassitude and then busted back down again for rowdiness, Crean was approached by one of his offers about undertaking an incredibly dangerous and unprecedented adventure to explore the farthest reaches of the world, and one of the only places left on Earth that had yet to be visited by man. Now, that Royal Navy officer was Robert Falcon Scott, and the mission was to traverse the frozen glacial wastes of Antarctica to become the first humans at the South Pole. Now, Crean set sail as the able seaman during Scott's discovery expedition in December of 1901. Sailing, marching, sledding across the Antarctica at a time when most high-tech cold gear on the market was just knife a bear to death and then wear his skin as a coat. Now, Crean and the heroic explorers of discovery dragged food, supplies, equipment, and other necessities across mile after mile of trackless white glacier to set up emergency depots along their path. Their ship, Discovery, sailed as far as it could go, but then became stuck in the ice, something the explorers had more or less expected, but not a situation that they expected would be a problem for the next 2 freaking years. Crean and the other crewmen tried to crack the ship free from the ice, but while doing this operation, Crean fell into the ice and was completely submerged in literally the coldest water on Earth. Now, his friends dragged him out, dripping with water that turned into icicles basically immediately, and then lost their shit when this big Irishman just went right back to work soaking wet, hammering at the ice with an axe trying to chip the ship free. Not long after this, he fell into the water again and had the same reaction, just popped right out and went right back to work. Now, Scot, Crean, and Discovery ended up being locked into the ice from February 1902 until February of 1904. 2 long, cold years. During this 2 years on ice, Crean used the time to set up supply depots along the way to the South Pole that could be used by future expeditions attempting to make a push for the pole. Along the way, he and 3 other guys ended up passing the furthest south that any human had ever traveled, and then he beat his record later that same week. The Discovery mission had been brutal and excruciating, but Robert fucking Scot loved Scott Crean's strength, work ethic, and the fact that he is always in a pretty good mood no matter how shitty the world was around him. And at every Royal Navy ship posting Scott had after this, he requested Crean on his crew. Then, when it was a time to actually return to Antarctica and push for the pole in 1911, Scott naturally hired Crean on as a petty officer for the mission. Now, the mission was named Terra Nova, New World, and its aim was nothing short of becoming the first humans to set foot on the South Pole. The mission was dangerous to the extreme. At one point, the ice split apart where Crean was camping, and he woke up to find that he and a few other crewmen were on an ice floe that was drifting away from the rest of the team. He immediately ran out, jumped across floating chunks of ice over freezing cold water and sub-zero temperatures, and, of course, high winds, and made his way over the ice to get help. Not long after that, Scott wrote how impressed he was that Crean wouldn't hesitate to drag sledges and supplies even though through neck-deep water, which, honestly, it's not a great idea when your cold weather kit is just fur, cotton, and leather. Crean didn't care. He was going to do that man shit, and his dude literally dragged a freaking gigantic wooden rowboat to within 150 miles of the South Pole. Crean and Scott got to go within striking distance of the pole, but Crean was heartbroken when Scott didn't choose him to be part of the party that would make the final push. Instead, Scott went off with 2 other men that were never heard from again. Tom Crean and 2 other guys waited behind as long as they could, but it soon became evident that something was very, very wrong. They waited as long as their supplies would allow them, but then sadly they turned back to get help, and that's when things got really bad. Not long after heading the 730-mile journey back towards the coast, Lieutenant Teddy Evans developed an extreme case of snow blindness, scurvy, and started pissing blood. He was going to die if they didn't get him out of there. Tom Crean strapped him to a sledge and dragged his ass 700 miles through the glacial desolation of Antarctica to get the guy out of there. When the sledge hit a particularly steep decline in the terrain, he just rode the sled down like a bobsled with his friend still attached. And Crean later reckoned that they probably broke 60 miles an hour during that slide. Somehow it got worse. Evans collapsed and couldn't go any further. So Crean went on alone to get help, 35 miles on foot, in sub-zero Antarctica, with only a chocolate bar and 2 biscuits for food. It took him 18 hours, solo, through whipping wind, whiteout blizzards, and freezing rain. And he did it after already having traveled 1,500 miles on foot over the course of the previous 3 months. But he got there, and he came back with help. Tom Crean rescued Teddy Evans through a superhuman feat of badassitude, but then he still wasn't done. He went back towards the pole, found Scott's frozen body, recovered his fallen friend's journals and photographs, and buried him where he fell. Then, and only then, did he return. It would be a short-lived return to Ireland, though, because 2 years later, another of Crean's former traveling buddies contacted him about going back to Antarctica for another dangerous mission. That friend was Ernest Shackleton, and the ensuing voyage is probably one of the most insane adventures in recorded history. In 1914, Crean set a sail aboard Endurance. Serving as the mission's second officer, the plan was to find a southwest voyage passage to the South Pole and basically set sail out through areas that had never been seen before. The pole had already been gained a couple years earlier by Roland Amundsen, but as with Discovery, the ship ended up getting itself wedged in the ice and couldn't be dug out. Then, to make things worse, the ice cracked the Endurance's hull, smashing the ship to pieces and rendering it completely unseaworthy. Shackleton and Crean were stuck in Antarctica without a ship, so of course, Crean solved that shit by dragging one of Endurance's rowboats a couple hundred miles through an Arctic hellscape, rowing 800 miles through the freezing wastes of the Weddell Sea, weathering a hurricane in a rowboat, and landing on Elephant Island. But he wasn't done. Then, as one of only 4 men who wasn't about to die from fatigue and exhaustion, he took that boat from Elephant Island across another couple hundred miles of uncharted, turbulent, and navigable water, landed at South Georgia, then walked 40 miles across frozen ice-capped mountain range to get help. Tom Crean was one of the men who joined him on that insane voyage and was at his side throughout the entire thing. It's one of the most superhuman feats of awesomeness in the history of humanity, and it's just one of the 3 adventures Tom Crean had during his lifetime. After somehow rowing and walking his way from the South Pole to Argentina, the 40-year-old Crean went home to Ireland and amazingly discovered that the girl he had crush on since he was a kid was still unmarried. So they got married, had 4 kids, and bought a bar that he renamed the South Pole Inn. He never talked about anything he did during any of his expeditions. He briefly went back to the service aboard the Royal Navy warship, the HMS Colleen, during World War I, but it doesn't look like he saw any action. And in 1921, Shackleton asked him to go back to another Antarctic expedition, but Crean had seen enough glacial ice for one lifetime, and he decided he'd rather just run his bar and go home to his wife and not have to spend too many more nights huddled in a canvas tent at the southern tip of the world. Now, he owned and operated his establishment for nearly 20 years before passing away of appendicitis in 1938 at the age of 61. And the funny part is if you go to his hometown today, you can find an adorable statue of him outside of his old home, holding an armful of puppies like in that picture above. If you go to the Ross Ice Shelf in Antarctica and somehow survive the sub-zero temperatures at 77 degrees latitude, there's an intimidating as hell 8,600-foot tall ice-covered mountain peak named after him. Dude, that's badass.